Sure, but you also have the idea that land that perhaps could support cattle or horses, as this ranch that you've created in Seven Sisters does, that the wine is a much more intensive and economically profitable use of the land.
And you can't blame some of the ranch families for selling off their land,
Mm-mm.
because that's a whole other thing I've learned knowing a lot of ranchers, is a lot of these people inherit the land from their parents and grandparents, and they have these huge ranches that you can't make a living being a cattle rancher anymore. You just can't, because again, that's something, the only ones that can really make money at it, these huge cattle ranches in Texas and stuff that many times are big corporations. So the small family cattle ranch, you just can't make a profit off of it. So they end up with these huge parcels of land, and to save some of it, they have to sell off some of it to pay the taxes and the upkeep on the land. And you only have a choice of selling to two people, really. That's developers, which nobody wants to do that. And in San Luis Obispo, indeed, it's hard to do that because they have a real strong no-growth faction there, or the wine people. And so it's sort of the lesser of the two evils, really.
So, well, I think it was a fascinating book from a variety of standpoints. I mean, not only your mystery plot, someone dies and why, which unfortunately we can't talk about, but I thought all of your economic background and so forth was wonderful too. But you, right before Seven Sisters, wrote a book called Mariner's Compass. Was that, in many ways, the book that was the most fun for you?
It was one of the, next to Fool's Puzzle, which was probably the hardest, being the first, it was the hardest book that I wrote, because
Why?
it was very internal. It had a lot to do with her mother, discovering a secret in her mother's past. And the other night I was telling you, and this is true in my family, that I have been told that there is a secret in my family's past, and that I will be told it when I'm old enough, which apparently at 46 I'm not old enough yet. And that's always fascinated me, and it's kind of a scary thing to tell a writer. You actually should always tell a writer all of your secrets, because otherwise we will make up something that's probably much worse than what the secret really is. So that sort of always got me thinking that there was some secret that was involved in my family, and gee, what would it be? And this is a totally made up idea of what a secret in somebody's past is and how it can affect generations to come. I'm very interested in the idea of how the past affects the present.
Who's the custodian of the secret in your family?
My grandmother.
And she is?
95.
And your mother is dead?
My mother passed away when I was writing Irish Chain.
I hope your grandmother wrote it down.
I hope so too. I know that she's told it to an aunt, so I'm hoping that, I find out what it is, but otherwise, but I think that's true of all families, though. I mean, I don't think that's unique to my family, that there are secrets.
No, but isn't that Southern too?
It is very Southern. It is very Southern, and it might end up being something that is not, as shocking as what your imagination always thinks that it is, but it gets you to thinking, and that's what a writer does. You take some small little thing that you hear, and then you expand on it, and that's really what I did with Mariner's Compass.
Well, a lot of Mariner's Compass was in fact about Benny's mother and her finding out her mother's past and coming to terms with it. And then part of it, of course, too, was that she's left this house, this weird inheritance, in the sense that she has no reason to think that it should have come to her. And she has to meet, after death, the person who left it to her and find out why, and move to inherit it. I mean, there are conditions. She doesn't just get the house.
And because I wanted to write a book where you discovered something about a person. Obviously I do this because a lot, because it's the same thing with Jack, where you discover things about the person who is dead. And that's what, and I actually came up with that idea because of something that happened to me in San Luis Obispo. I became friends with a woman there who owns the last independent bookstore in town, the Novel Experience, Christine Hill. And I used to stay with her at her house, and she, it's not the house she's living in now, but she had a house there in San Luis, and it had a little apartment that they had made up in the garage. And the apartment was for her brother-in-law, her husband's brother, who was a sea captain, because he didn't have a house to live in at the time, because he spent probably 10 or 11 months out on the sea. He would do these big charter sailboats. And so when I would come to stay with her for 2 or 3 weeks at a time, I would stay in his little apartment. And everything about it was his. It was all had to do with the ocean. All had to do with, and so here I was staying in this person's room whom I had never met, looking at their pictures on their wall, sleeping in their bed, and you got to thinking, wow, and I probably stayed in it 5 or 6 times before I actually met him. And it just started me thinking, gee, you really find out a lot about a person by looking at their possessions.
Right. Well, in fact, that's part of when Benny moves into the
Right.
house, which is a condition that she has to meet. And your description is quite architectural. You know, you go into how the whole place was put together and how he'd obviously lovingly crafted it using his wood carving skills and so forth, you know, to make it so
And
special.
the wood carving I just got into because I'm so interested in folk arts, and I want to put more than just quilting in my books, and so I decided to use the folk art of wood carving. And at one time, recently I heard it's closed, but there was a wood carving museum up in northern part of San Luis County, right outside of Hearst Castle, the little town that's outside of Hearst Castle.
Right.
And I went up there and I looked through the wood carving museum, and there was a lot of wonderful wood carvings done by the people who had done carvings up for Hearst Castle and stuff. So I got the idea of making him a wood carver because I wanted to explore that craft.
I have an idea for you because I've been there. When we drove from Santa Barbara, visiting Sue Grafton, up to Monterey for BoucherCon a couple years ago, off the road there is a glass blowing industry. I mean, there's a fellow who is a glass blower, and he doesn't have a museum, but he does have a workshop and a sales. It's a ghost town. Then he has moved into and occupied, and his thing is he's a glass blower. And there's also at least one, if not two, glass blowers operating outside of Santa Fe, right along the edges. So there is another folk art that, and that has a fantastic history. I mean, you go all the way back to, you know, go to Venice and visit Murano and so forth. But if you want to branch out into other kinds of folk art, you got to. I'll see if I can find out where it is. It's just off Highway 1 on the right-hand side as you're driving north. So it would.
I'm wondering if you're talking about the town of Harmony. Are you
You know, I believe it might be.
Yeah, because it's like population 5 or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah, because there's a lot of art people. I've walked through there, and I don't think I've ever seen
the glass blowing thing, I think, would be tons of fun for the kind of thing that you do. And of course, you've also got, although I'm not sure it's in the county, but you've also got that Solvang, the whole Danish community.
I haven't even explored that. Right.
Well, it's very commercial and sort of cute in one sense, but you know, they've got a lot of stuff there that you know, bakeries and all sorts of interesting. It's a very tourist kind of thing, but nonetheless it's a very special community. Might be sort of fun. So you've got a wonderful panoply of things to write about. But what I wanted to ask you about Mariner's Compass from a mystery standpoint is that this is a book in which there isn't a body that opens up the story. I mean, you're now presented, well, there is in the sense that there's the old guy who died and left Benny the house, but she doesn't go there and open the door and bam, a corpse falls out of the closet. What happens?
Well, one of the reasons I did that is writing a series, of course, and an amateur sleuth series is probably even harder than when you're writing a PI or a police officer series, is, you know, why does this person keep stumbling on dead bodies? I mean, it does, you obviously have a suspension of disbelief if you're going to read a murder mystery series. You know, most of us do not even encounter one murder in our life, much less one every, you know, year, every 2 months. It seems like it happens in these series. So I wanted to try to write a book where there actually wasn't a murder in it. But then you have the problem of how do you sustain suspense if you're not going to have a murder, because that's the whole point of a murder mystery. So I came up with this idea of her inheriting this house. To inherit it, she had to stay in it 2 weeks by herself, because I knew I needed to get her split up from Gabe, which causes, you know, the tension. You always have to keep that tension up. And then discovering who this man is that left her a house. Why in the world would this total stranger leave her all his possessions? So it became a different type of a book, a mystery, but the mystery is more who was he and who was he to her, and ended up being connected with her mother. I wanted to write about those issues. I knew I wanted to write about the whole mother-daughter issue, secrets, that type of thing, but I wasn't ready to do it until this book. Like I said, my mom passed away when I was in the middle of writing Iris Chain. She got to read Fool's Puzzle, and she got to see a copy of the cover, but she died before it came out, so she never got to see a finished book. So I wasn't ready to write about it till about 4 years after that. Not even writing about the mother issue could. So, but then I was ready by Mariner's Compass.
Sure.
So.
Well, writing as therapy is something, you know, many authors can turn events in their own lives into stories and probably work their way through a lot of stuff by writing about it. It's a wonderful book, I think, for mothers and daughters. It's a Mother's Day kind of book. But what I also liked was the idea that you can have a suspense curve that can be sustained by a quest. You know, I mean, most often it's the detection is sort of the quest. You know, it's the detective working his way through evidence and clues and so forth and around a circle of suspects, and the quest is to identify the killer.